My name's John Thwaites and I'm chair of Monash Sustainable Development Institute. And I'm here to have what I think is going to be a really interesting discussion with Ronni Kahn from OzHarvest about the role of food, how we all should have access to good food and how important it is not to waste it.
Hi, my name's Ronni Kahn. I'm the founder and CEO of OzHarvest, and I'm thrilled to be here discussing Good Food for All, the wonderful report that has come out from Monash Sustainable Development Institute, together with John Thwaites, the chair of that institute. Now we understand the direct correlation between food waste and the climate crisis. And as a result, we are focused so singly on fighting food waste to help protect the planet. And we are committed to driving action on the UN SDG goal 12.3, halving food waste by 2030, which is why we are here today with you, John, and your amazing team at the Monash Sustainable Development Institute.
Well, thank you, Ronni, and congratulations on the incredible way that you've raised the issue of food waste in the public imagination, and I think brought a real focus on not so much just what we're wasting now, but how we need to improve in the future. And you played a key role in setting a target, or in Australia setting a target of halving food waste by 2030. And I'm here, I guess, representing Monash Sustainable Development Institute, and we have an objective to promote well-being and sustainable development. And we use the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework for achieving that. And why is that? It's because first, the goals were agreed by all countries. And so they're universally applied and accepted. But second, they do something that's really important, and they balance the economic, the social, and the environmental factors that we all have to deal with and seek to integrate them to promote well-being. And finally, I think where they're important is that they set targets, because it's all very well to talk about things and be concerned and criticize, but unless you set targets and then develop policies and strategies to achieve them, well, we're not doing any good. And so that's what we're all about, doing much better by setting targets and then developing policies to achieve them.
Well, I'm very excited about this report and hope that it will garner national action. Government, business, and citizens will hear about it and get on board.
I hope that this report does accelerate action, because we do have a target, but we're not doing enough to meet it. And we have to raise that now with the public, with companies, and with government. And we have to really step up the pace of action.
The SDGs really are the blueprint for creating a better future. And they outline the bold and transformative steps which are urgently needed to shift and change the world onto a more sustainable and resilient path.
So they are broad, they're ambitious, but they're what we need if we're going to meet the big challenges that we're facing in the current world. Well, I just had a thought then, Ronni. The SDGs are a bit like the shopping list when you go to buy your food, aren't they?
Yeah, totally.
They're really a list that you really need to go through and then use them to set your priorities and decide what you're going to do. And so I think food and food lists are going to be important to achieving the SDGs as well.
Absolutely. I was going to say how aligned that is with what we know in terms of behavior, that if we make a shopping list, we're more likely just to buy what we need and then not waste food. So the Sustainable Development Goals are there to keep us on track and to make sure that we achieve exactly what we're supposed to.
Yeah, it's all about planning out for the future, whether it's a food list or the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yep, for sure.
Interestingly, Australia is tracking incredibly well in meeting some of the SDGs and appallingly badly in others. So if you look at Sustainable Development Goal number 3, which is good health, Australia is actually one of the best in the world. We have one of the longest life expectancies. We still have a challenge in the gap between Indigenous life expectancy and non-Indigenous, but overall our health is very good. Our education performance is right there at the top in the world as well. And we do pretty strongly in many of the economic goals. Where we really fall behind is in climate change and the environment. And a recent global report, the Global Sustainable Development Report 2021, actually rated Australia bottom in the world on climate. And that's because not only do we have some of the highest emissions per head, but we're also one of the highest exporters per head of fossil fuels. And so we're having a big negative impact on climate change because of our exports as well as because of what we do here in Australia. I guess the other really relevant factor where we've got big challenges that's very relevant to today's discussion is SDG number 12, sustainable production and consumption. And unfortunately, we rank pretty lowly there. That's in areas like waste or how much resources we use per head. You know, Australia has one of the highest material footprints per head. That's the amount of stuff we use. And of course, we also don't do particularly well in terms of food waste. And I'm sure Ronni will talk more about that.
Yeah, well, how we produce, consume, and dispose of food and tackling food waste is an integral part of that. And that is the SDG 12.3. And food waste is also a major contributor to climate change. It's responsible for 10% of global greenhouse gases, which is even more than the aviation sector. And most people don't know that. OzHarvest is committed to halving food waste, and we know the immense size of the challenge we still face. Over 7.3 million tons of food goes to waste in Australia every year, and that's costing us, the low estimate is $20 billion. That's costing our economy. We think that it's much more than that. And let's not forget the millions of people that still go hungry. In Australia, over 5 million people a year in Australia, and COVID has added at least 1 million to that, struggle with food insecurity. So tackling food waste has direct benefits for the other goals like zero hunger and climate action. So out of all the goals though, it is the one that every single citizen, everyone can do something about. Project Drawdown, which is so powerful, cites reducing food waste as one of the most powerful climate solutions. But there's still so much work to be done. And our challenge is we have only 9 years to go. So urgent action is required at all levels of society, from policymakers, businesses, and the public.
I think we need to understand how food is so central to climate policies, but also broader well-being and environmental policies. For example, biodiversity, huge impact on global biodiversity is our agricultural system, land clearing, the impact on habitat. And so when you waste food, you're not only having a negative impact on the climate, but you're also potentially having a negative impact on biodiversity. And we've even learnt through the COVID pandemic, the risk of zoonotic disease from land clearing associated with agriculture and human activity. So once again, if we're going to stay healthy and fit into the future, we have to be thinking about food and doing everything we can to prevent food wastage.
People want to do something, they just don't know how, and they don't know what they can do. And yet food waste is the low-hanging fruit. It's the way to engage with citizens because they can do something about it. Our challenge is that, you know, there's been some really great foundational work, but the progress is very, very slow. I mean, if we just look at Australia, in 2015, we actually were instrumental in getting our government to commit to that SDG 12.3. In 2017, so only 2 years later, a national food waste strategy was launched. And this is a framework to support collective action to halve food waste. But in 2019, the national baseline was only set to monitor and track the progress and give us this much needed data, like how we know that it's 7.3 million tons. The good part is that some core entities have been established. There's the Fight Food Waste CRC, which has been funded by the federal government to reduce food waste across the supply chain. But as a research cooperative, the projects have a 10-year time frame. Good things are happening, but the progress is very slow and we don't have the time. The Stop Food Waste Australia has been created to bring together business and industry partners with seed funding from the Australian government. And next month, it will launch Australia's voluntary commitment, the Food Pact, which is so important and fundamental for businesses to commit to halving food waste. We've already seen really good success in the UK with this. But it's all great work, but there is still so much to do. And there's this real need for Australia to get up to speed to catch up with other countries.
I think one interesting aspect of the urgency is to say, why not do it overnight? Because there is no real reason to delay reducing food waste. Compare it to, say, transforming our transport system, getting people to drive electric vehicles. That is going to take a decade to 15 years. Huge challenges transferring the whole transport system, or our energy system. We've got to change the grid. We've got to be able to put renewables in places that hasn't been used before. But food's not like that. There's really no reason why tomorrow we couldn't completely change that. There's no reason to delay. I also think that in the time of COVID, where we're all changing so many habits, it's actually probably a pretty good time to reconsider your food habits, people's food habits. We're all focusing on how and when we shop now, not going to the shop as much perhaps as we did in the past. So that does mean you really have to plan.
I fully agree. I mean, inspiring citizen action now is definitely easier than ever before. We've just still got to reach those citizens because it'll prevent, 2.5 million tons of food from going to waste.
I think one important recommendation is for government, because government does have a key role to play in tackling climate change and reducing food waste. We don't have proper recognition of the role of food waste in climate policies. And we also need government to put some resources and support into the food waste strategies and into companies and organisations that are helping to reduce food waste. This will pay off for government and the community because it will reduce carbon emissions, stop waste, and potentially also benefit many in the community who are able to use the food that previously was just thrown into landfill. It's really all about efficient expenditure of public money, and governments obviously have a clear role in that.
So businesses need to sign up to the Food Pact because they need to be aware of their responsibility. Any business that either in the food business, and I don't only mean food businesses because most businesses bring food in some way, but by signing up to Australia's Food Pact with the Stop Food Waste Australia, this approach will allow us to target, measure, act. And what we know that this approach has saved businesses around the world billions of dollars. It's proven and it's a clear framework to work towards. I think what's really important is scaling up the food rescue sector, because it is also a key to halving food waste and creating better security. I mean, any business with surplus food that can be eaten should be donating it. And we need to drive edible surplus food up the waste hierarchy, because if it's food that can be eaten, it should go to people and not landfill. Citizens need to value food more. They need to understand, first of all, that every single time they throw away an apple, it's not just the 60 cents or the $1 that it costs to buy that apple. It's the water, it's the labor, it's the energy, it's the fuel that was embedded in that particular apple. And so the single most powerful thing that citizens can do to be climate change activists is to be mindful and not waste food, because we are all connected to food and each and every one of us are part of the solution. Australia must spring into action. And as that old beautiful saying goes, a problem shared is a problem halved. And what we do know is that wasting food is costing us the earth.